Good afternoon and welcome to Screen Dance International. It's wonderful to have you joining in. I'm Joanna McNamara, curator and founder of SDI, and we're thrilled to be able to present Peter Sparling's lecture demonstration as part of SDI's overall programming this year. This lecture dem was intended to be a live experiential workshop that was going to be on stage in the Detroit Film Theater at the Detroit Institute of Arts. But as we all know, the world has changed, and Peter quickly changed gears and created this pre-recorded version, which is sure to both entertain and inform. Peter has a long and distinguished career as a professional dancer, choreographer, company member, director of his own company, educator, painter, and award-winning filmmaker. You're going to hear more details about Peter's background and career in his upcoming presentation. You're also going to get a fascinating look at Peter's work as he cues, rehearses, directs, and then edits a wonderfully whimsical work that he has made titled Scramble Theory 101. You'll also see some of Peter's current works and how he uses a technique of merging his own human body with his own paintings in dance film. These current works often address two topics that are underrepresented in dance film today, namely the nude male body and ageism. Please join Peter and me for a Q&A at the end of this screening. You can do that by going to ArtLabJ YouTube channel and signing up. You can also see Peter's full version of Scramble Theory 101 by going again to ArtLabJ YouTube channel and signing up for the Screen Dance International Project Michigan. Hope you enjoy and hope to see you there. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Peter Sparling, Detroit-born and a resident of Ann Arbor since 1984. I am a dancer, choreographer, video artist, painter, and writer. 2 years ago, I retired after 34 years as a faculty member at University of Michigan's Department of Dance to devote myself entirely to making my art. I have since then shot and edited numerous works for the screen that have appeared at live and online festivals. Joanna has invited me to share with this festival's viewers my screen dance Scramble Theory 101, shot while I was still teaching at U of M and featuring my first-year undergrad dance composition class. She also asked if I would provide an inside glimpse or behind-the-scenes tour of my process. I'm happy to invite you into my home backyard studio to introduce you to some of the work I do to make screen dances. As you will soon see, my work in video draws from an interdisciplinary practice that embraces painting, writing, music, and photography. My introduction will therefore lead to a broader investigation of my use of these diverse media, particularly painting, to create works that are always informed by my life as a dancer and my understanding of the shared kinesthetics of making or doing and seeing. I am fascinated by the intimate relationship of action and vision, of the visceral and the visual. Screen dance, or dance for the camera, is now the catch-all term for movement works on film or video that could never be realized on stage. Rather, the movement is conceived of in a very tight symbiosis with camera and editing effects and is intended specifically for the screen. With the pandemic radically altering performance and presentation options, dance online and on video has become the new norm for dancers, choreographers, and dance audiences. We acknowledge that it will not replace the thrill of live bodies on stage, but instead bridge the gap created by the pandemic. And in doing so, the world is taking a renewed interest in bodies on screens, a global fascination originating with early film and Hollywood more than a century ago. My process is somewhat unique in that I've become a one-man show. I do all of my own staging, directing, dancing, editing, and marketing myself, largely because it is more practical, inexpensive, and efficient. I can assemble works quickly, knowing exactly what I want as both performer and editor. I work in Final Cut Pro, an editing software program that I've been using since I began making videos about 20 years ago. For Scramble Theory 101 and for most of my recent videos, I've incorporated keying or green screen to be able to easily transport my moving figure into any landscape or visual environment. I will often paint those landscapes by generating a series of painted backdrops on canvas that follow precisely the progress of the movement. Or I will find still images or vintage film to act as settings for my moving figure. This can remain in a more abstract, formal realm, or move the works into narrative form, creating meaning and a story by juxtaposition, association, and the intentional shaping of a thematic thread. With Scramble Theory 101, I began by taking my dance composition students to U of M's North Campus Digital Media Commons. I'd reserved the video studio there for some other solo projects and already had the green screen set up for a 3-camera shoot, including one overhead camera. As you can see, the space is entirely green, backdrop and floor, to allow for maximum flexibility in choosing provocative camera angles and effects in editing with chroma key. I directed the dancers in a guided improvisation and asked that they perform for the overhead camera while dancing flat on the floor. You'll see in this original footage how they cleverly took my verbal cues to create morphing body drawings, alone, in small groups, or as a collective. I am fascinated with group dynamics, complex systems, and the organic mapping of behaviors. Dancers know how to embody collaboration, cooperation, and a collective consciousness. They have a heightened sense for kinesthetic empathy, just as musicians know how to fuse together sound. This is particularly true with the art of improvisation. For the past 15 years, I have pretty much given up on planned or scored choreography, where every step is pre-planned, rehearsed, memorized, then performed as a largely set entity. Even if I do make a dance for a group, I'll originate all the movement by videotaping myself improvising to an idea or musical score, then ask the dancers to learn it as their movement score or part. In this case, I invited the dancers to invent on the spot, giving the movement flow a spontaneity and organic element of morphing and surprise. Good. Someone else come in? Yep, 2 of you can go. Fabulous. Yes. We're rolling through the heavens. stop-start. There could be like sudden little explosions. Nice. Go from very curvilinear to very angular, sharp edges. Yeah. And change your place so that you're no longer in the place you started, but you roll to another spot. And occasionally there can be a duet where you are actually holding on to a part of a body of someone near you. Nice. Oh, this is good. Yeah, start connecting with a leg or an arm. Let's make a web, a human web. Keep moving, keep moving. Let's have 4 more people roll in and connect with this web. You can roll across. Go ahead, Maya. So let me lead you through the process of editing to make the final work. So you see this basic format for Final Cut Pro where you can lay onto the track as many tracks as you wish. You can just stack them, and I've been known to stack as many as 25, 30 tracks one on top of the other to create very dense files. This is relatively simple. You have your basic track that we took at the studio at the Duderstadt with the students improvising on the green floor. I then add chroma key from a series of effects and float the figures in their black void. I can get a pretty good idea then of what I'm looking at. I can then put beneath that track various graphics or images which will then become the backdrop. I've decided on a set of Pantone grids, if you will, and here I've imported a blue grid with cross dissolve such that the gray grid can then slowly cross dissolve into a blue, and then I've added a red grid which then will cross dissolve into that. Here I've got, following that, the series of solos, duets, trios, and I've chosen their own specific backdrop. Once I put all this together, I can then decide the tempo of how quickly do I want to speed this up. And of course, as you'll see in the piece, I have chosen to do it very fast action, a la super silent movie sped up. And I can alter this by going under Modify, Retime, Reset Speed. I can take it from its original 100% normal, and I've decided to bring it to 476% speed to give it just the right speed for the effect that I want, and also to fit with Tola McDonough's musical score, which I've laid at the bottom here. And here I can begin to line up the score with the visuals. So that's basically the layout of the Final Cut Pro and how I put this together. I'll provide you with one more example of the use of green screen and the importing of various visuals as backdrop. Les Illuminations, to the score by Benjamin Britten, involves an overlay of beautiful monoprints by my husband John with multiple images of my own body I will shoot many of them in this studio and clone myself through editing and use of green screen to overlay and create these kind of body landscapes, if you will. In one of the sections, you'll see my figure here against one of John's backdrops, and I want to take you into that to show you how I create it. I film myself against green screen in my home studio. I drop it into editing, I frame it, I move it across the screen, I apply chroma key, and then overlay it with one of the monoprints of my husband, John Gatoski.
Gracieux fils de autour de ton front couronné de fleurades et de berges, tes yeux.
We will see Scramble Theory 101 on the program following this talk, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have after that screening. Before going further into the heart of the matter, or more about my obsession with painting as it correlates with the making of my dance and video, I want to pause to articulate the various techniques I've developed for myself in editing screen dances. These techniques all presuppose the use of keying effects and green screen. As we saw with Scramble Theory 101 and Les Illuminations, I can shoot the moving figure against a green background or floor and then create a backdrop, setting, or landscape for it by importing images. These images can be pre-produced still images, or they can be found footage of vintage film or video. In my newfound fascination with acrylic painting, I will paint backdrops specifically to synchronize with the moving figure. I will be speaking about that process in a moment. I've attempted the painstaking process of a primitive form of animation as well, painting as many as 300 figures to make a short animation. Another technique I use is to clone my own figure or replicate it into Busby Berkeley-like group choreographies or formations. During the past decade, I have amassed a series of works I call clonal renderings, and I will share with you more about those later in my talk. I'd now like to take us into what has grown so close to my heart as a maker for the past decade. It begins with a celebration of painting and painters and moves through a lifetime love affair with the visual arts to a newfound integration of painting into my practice as dancer and video artist. I will integrate into this part of my presentation a lecture I have been giving this past year entitled The Dance of the Paint, Thoughts on an Interdisciplinary Practice. I'll begin with two quotes. The first, writers must not underestimate the painter's labor and study, that effort which is so like the effort of thought and which allows us to speak of a language of painting. That's Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And then the second, Merleau-Ponty was deeply engaged in the silent meanings of painting and their relation to the human body and its gestures, meanings that he argued are different from and prior to words. This is Siri Hustvedt from a review of a work on Edward Munch by Karl Ove Knausgaard. These quotes on the act of painting address the phenomenon and contradiction of speaking about a practice that has its own language apart from and preceding words, much like the act of dance. Despite this contradiction, I'll do my best to speak about these two primal practices, painting and dance, and how they have become almost interchangeable to me at this time in my career as a working artist. Let me begin with the work of the American painter Joan Mitchell. Mitchell worked alongside the abstract expressionists in New York in the 1950s, then moved permanently to France, where she painted until her death in 1992. Joan Mitchell's paintings evoke clusters of buzzing life, masses appearing out of sheer motion, materializing in color, texture, and above all, the stroke of the brush. A calligrapher of color, she seduces our eyes with tonal saturations of lines of varying densities, using a variety of brush sizes to build an illusion of depth. Our vision oscillates in a liminal state of partial recognition, hovering between the figurative and the purely kinetic. Her accumulations of strokes to indicate both light and mass, her direct lineage from Cézanne and the Impressionists, merge with the implied physical action of applying the paint to the canvas, her connection to the action painters and abstract expressionists. The resulting physicality makes the canvas vibrate with a vitality akin to nature. We witness a hive, a haven, a glade, a glimpse through relative transparencies, veils, cascades of dappled color. There is relationship or something happening before our eyes. We happen upon a phenomenon in progress, and a human act in progress, because we can also share in the act of her painting. We follow the stroke of the brush and are drawn by kinesthetic empathy into the painting beneath its seductive surfaces. A bower, an embrace, a flurry. We are fortunate to have our very own Joan Mitchell masterpiece at the DIA, her 1985 work, Before Again 2. I could go on like this about many artists whose paintings have fascinated me for decades. Art is my drug. It allows me to see things in heightened relief. I get high. I hallucinate. I am carried into new acts of perception and feeling. As a 69-year-old dancer, I am grateful to have found a medium and a practice that provide for me the same thrill and depth of engagement as dancing did for so many years. My own obsession with the act of painting and the stroke of the brush began 6 or so years ago, but my fascination with the medium was fixed the first time I visited the Detroit Institute of Arts as a child. My favorite paintings were Frans Hals's The Laughing Boy, Van Gogh's Self-Portrait, and Bouguereau's Hazelnuts. They emanated lives of their own and retained their vitality through repeated visits. We hung a reproduction of the Hazelnuts in my mother's room in her rest home, and it kept her company until the day she died. I consumed every image and piece of writing on Van Gogh over the years, and even choreographed and performed a dance solo, A Fearful Symmetry, using text from the artist's letters to his brother Theo. And I would always recall how Hals was not afraid to show us how he applied the paint with his brush and made the face seem more alive, more spontaneous, as if capturing the boy in the act of laughing in the very moment. While attending Dawson Elementary School in Northwest Detroit, I was placed in talented art once a week with Mrs. Carlisle, who wore faux Chanel suits and urged us to find our individual inspirations while we sat on stools at high benches and painted on large sheets of paper. One of my cityscapes was framed and hung high over the lockers in the hallway outside the first grade room. I was assigned with designing and arranging the hallway showcases and spent hours released from the classroom to sit and cut out forms from colored paper to place within the frame, a prelude to my years as a dancer choreographer arranging bodies within the stage's proscenium frame. Once I began studying the violin at age 9 with the beloved Detroit string teacher Era Zarunian, music took over all my spare moments with practicing, lessons, orchestra, string quartet, and summer music camp at Interlochen in northern Michigan. It was while a high school student and a very serious violinist in the orchestra at Interlochen Arts Academy that I took an introduction to dance class as an alternative to the state-required phys ed. By my senior year, I had changed my major to dance and was performing on stage before I really knew what I was doing. I just followed the cues in the music while discovering how my body could be a paintbrush, a moving sculpture, an instrument, a drawing tool, and an architectural feature in a choreographic design that unfurled in time and space. My professional dance career began my third year at the Juilliard School, touring the world with the José Limón Dance Company. I began to draw while traveling or while hitchhiking through Europe during summer break. Self-portraits, quick sketches of people on the street, waiting in train stations, the interior of a small flat in Paris. I wandered through countless museums and saw paintings I had viewed in art books as a child and teenager. I was introduced to a higher form of collaboration and fusion of dance and the visual arts when I joined Martha Graham's dance company in 1973. Since Graham had begun making dances in the late 1930s, she had been drawn to artists and composers for inspiration and to assist her in bringing her intense, dramatic, and stylized vision to the stage. She worked with Alexander Calder while rehearsing her all-women's company at Bennington College in the late 30s, and beginning in 1940 with the great Japanese-American sculptor Isamu Noguchi. Noguchi's sparse sets, exquisite modernist props, and Jungian landscapes elevated Graham's work to a level of mid-century modern abstraction, while allowing for Graham to tell her emotionally charged stories, often based on historical figures or mythological legends. Graham's movement soon took on a razor-sharp edge to emulate the sculptural aspects of a Noguchi set, and generations of Graham dancers were groomed through studying the Graham technique to activate the space and project the contours of our bodies with pulsing accents derived from the pelvis and the thrust of the torso as it spiraled around the spine and cut indelible shapes in space. Graham taught us how to place those shapes into a flow or sequence and intelligently connect them or knit them together with transitional movement. The jagged, irregular rhythms of these phrases and the visceral torque of the body created a look that was both archaic and contemporary. Not unlike the brushstrokes of an early Jackson Pollock, Franz Klein, Kandinsky, Picasso, or the music of her early mentor Louis Horst, or later, of Aaron Copland, William Schumann, Samuel Barber, Giancarlo Menotti, and Igor Stravinsky. I quickly picked up on Graham's legacy by making my own dances for my own fledgling dance company and working with composers, actors, and visual artists. Dance was my passport to the world's museums and galleries as I toured both as a member of Graham's company and as an independent artist through all of Russia, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and the US. After 12 years on the road, I finally settled in a small campus town in Michigan to take a steady job as a tenure-track professor in the Department of Dance at University of Michigan. I wasn't too far from my childhood home in Detroit and the museum that started it all for me. My first collaboration as a faculty member was with an architect and a composer. I later worked closely with painters, scientists, and poets, and wrote my own poems and texts, while continuing to commission costumes, sets, and musical scores. I championed interdisciplinarity on campus with a group of adventurous faculty and spent 34 years moving freely between the art forms and departments on campus. I learned video editing, began to perform and edit my own screen dances, and for 19 years taught students the art of screen dance or dance for the camera with a colleague, Terry Saris, from the film department. I became unofficial resident artist of the university's Life Sciences Institute and collaborated with a cell biologist on an interdisciplinary performance staged in the rotunda of the U of M Museum of Natural History. 6 years later, I discovered painting with acrylics and converted my life sciences office into my painting studio. 2 years ago, I retired in order to devote all of my time to painting and creative projects. I built for myself a home studio in our backyard. My husband, John Gutowski, had the converted garage for his printmaking studio years ago, and now I have a room of my own in the upper yard to paint, edit, and shoot video, write, and ruminate. I enjoy spending hours lost in making art and occasionally inviting friends and fellow artists over to compare notes and to get feedback. Where does this leave me? I am now a white, gay, male, distinguished university professor emeritus and most grateful to be finished with academia. I always felt more an outsider as a working artist among academics than as a gay man. The misunderstandings and fears among academics of the sensual, the corporeal, of embodiment as an act of research and lived knowledge, has been slow to dissipate within various theoretical circles. The body, or embodiment, is now embraced and championed by scholars within queer and identity studies, often as if they invented it themselves. In my retirement, I am painting mostly male nudes and creating videos that celebrate a dancer's accumulated wisdom and aging body. I am more other than ever, working against the ideal of a young, buff dancer's body and exploring the borders of art, aging, and eroticism. I would like to now focus in more detail on the act of painting and how it has become a channel or transposition or translation of everything I've ever known and made as a musician, poet, dancer, choreographer, and video artist. For me, there is no difference in the creative processes and in the essential act of making. There really are no boundaries. As a dancer for 50 years, I've etched, stretched, honed, feathered, edged, shaped, tapered, lathed, contoured, distorted, contorted, and sculpted every centimeter of my flesh and bone into outrageous acts of movement performance. It eventually came to me to pick up a brush and translate that body knowledge via the stroke of that brush, to experience how that stroke issues from the same impulses that guide my dancing body, and how color, the application of acrylic paint as evidence of a physical gesture onto a receptive but neutral space of the canvas, can leave behind a visceral and visual impression that strikes the viewer as real or having actually happened, producing the shock of recognition. I had already been able to extend my dancing career as a video artist, filming myself, then editing countless works for the screen in which I perform feats via editing magic that I could never replicate on stage. I know how to regard my body in third person, as a form to manipulate from a distance, once removed, as other. I entitled my first solo show of paintings, The Post-Photographic Body, See Me As I Feel, and prefaced my artist's statement with a quote from the Swedish poet Thomas Tranströmer and his poem entitled Preludes. Two truths approach each other. One comes from inside, the other from outside. And where they meet, we have a chance to catch sight of ourselves. For this show, I also included on TV monitor a medley of screen dances, my acrylic worlds, that combined performance for the camera, video editing, and painting. Movement shot against green screen is cloned and choreographed in editing via chroma key effect into a video of bodies floating in a black void. That video is then projected onto a blank white canvas. Choosing hinge moments in the action, I'll pause the video in order to paint in a landscape around the figures, then photograph that canvas without those projected figures before forwarding to the next hinge in action in the video. While the paint is still wet, I augment the painting to shift the scene ahead in time and place. accumulating a series of still photos of an ever-morphing canvas until the closing scene. I then drop the completed series of photos into my Final Cut Pro file and place the still photos behind their moment of action. When cross dissolves and careful sizing of the figure and landscape take effect, I produce an illusion of continuity and flow, of shifting scenes or backdrops, or of a fractured narrative that allows my digitized body to inhabit an imagined universe. I could make all sorts of statements or propositions regarding the relationship of dance to painting, as I think I already have. I could also insist that every dancer become literate in the visual arts, since what they practice is indeed a visual art. I could urge dancers and everyone to take up the brush to connect their bodily sensorium with their own inner visions, their unique way of seeing the world, and to unlock new ways of seeing that world. In the end, it is a highly personal orientation and choice to be drawn to oils, acrylics, or the space of the canvas. It demands that one spend the hours experimenting, learning a craft by instruction from teachers, past and living masters, and through trial and error. One passes through one's own blue periods, one's figurative or abstract phases, and finds parallels and links to other painters that zigzag and leap across time and styles. My own story is one of coming into an expressive practice relatively late in my life and finding it a seamless transition from everything I'd ever experienced in previous incarnations or creative practices. Inversely, I think there is much to be learned by painters and visual artists in watching dance and better understanding its particular kind of shape-shifting intelligence. How do we share the ability to bend space and time, to affect the temporal realm and speed up, slow down, subdivide time, to draw the viewer's attention to details, to the whole, to some aha moment of revelation? How do both dancer and painter rely upon kinesthetic empathy and the production of illusion to evoke depth, weight, sensation, feeling, and memory in the eye of the beholder? How is line produced, sustained, made visually impactful? Is the calligraphy of the brush precisely what we dancers emulate with our bodies? I always come back to the French writer Laurence Loup and her 4 elements to look for in dance: weight, flow, time, and space. Certainly these elements link all artistic media, or for that matter, all design, engineering, and all human activities. I might add to these 4 the element of motivation or intention, sometimes subliminal and irrational, not easily tracked, and often full of ambiguities. In some cases, an artist's intention can be forged with utmost determination. In others, randomness, chance, and indeterminacy rule the process. These extremes embody the 2 opposing principles that have shaped much of the past century: providence or determinacy versus probability and chance. Martha Graham often talked to us about the element of inevitability that every dance must have to set for itself the drive and momentum to move the action to its one ultimate conclusion. Momentary diversions were allowed, dream sequences and fantasies, solo moments and interior monologues versus full chorus, and intimate contracted moments versus full stage pageantry. In Graham's case, it was about the body drawing energy inwards, then expelling it outwards like breathing. Merce Cunningham, one of Martha's first male company dancers, left Graham in the mid-40s to join John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg in an escape from narrative form, from this obsession with the inevitable, from Graham's doom-eager drive, to let in another seemingly infinite set of possibilities for structuring dances. Cunningham invited into his process simultaneity, Zen-like acceptance and embrace of the disparate, the non-connected, the everyday occurrence, the seeming incongruity of random juxtaposition, to create another kind of sublime. As a response to this administration's inhumane policies towards immigration, I felt compelled to make my first video animation entitled Cornered, or Detainee's Lament. As painstaking as the process was, the satisfaction of producing the illusion of fluid motion and a certain primitive stylization via the hand painting of around 200 still images made it all worth it. I was originally drawn to the empty corner of my studio as a site for advanced improvisation, and it suggested an expressive intimacy and bearing of both body and soul. The title and music came after I completed the animation. I was seeking something that struck both a contemporary political chord and a timeless sense of impending loss. After trying a dozen different musical scores, I found that the recording of the Purcell aria sung by my former U of M colleague Shirley Verrett could not be beat. I will end with samples of my most recent work, made under quarantine in my home studio this past summer. The musical score of Paul Dukas for The Sorcerer's Apprentice is most familiar via the Disney animated version of the story in Fantasia. I found on YouTube a performance of the composer's own two-piano arrangement and borrowed from my husband John Kotowski's extensive costume closet to populate the screen with Sorcerer, Apprentice, and a multitude of clones. For A Month of Goldbergs, I was inspired with the 1955 renowned recording by Glenn Gould of Bach's Goldberg Variations. My task was to come up with a month's worth of different personae, improvise to both the opening aria and one of the variations embodying that persona, and then compose for the screen a daily composition built upon that improvisation. Think video diary, review, vaudeville, or an encyclopedia of movement styles, editing effects, and treatments that have come to be my signature looks. For most of the entries, I improvised in front of a green screen hung in the backyard painting studio. For a few others, I dug into my archives of improvisations shot at the U of M Digital Media Commons in recent years. Three video poems for the pandemic followed the impulse to write down short poems as a response to the pandemic. A New Beginning expresses the wonder of an unexpected byproduct of shutdown, the silence. I was lucky to find some terrific vintage footage on the Prelinger Archives website to frame the work. And finally, Clonal Renderings 7, Pandemic Portfolio, follows the 5 piano pieces of Arnold Schoenberg's Opus 23 to imagine a dreamscape as a tribute to the healthcare workers and doctors who must face mortality and the compromised human body every day. To conclude, my works for video freely exploit an array of digital editing options to combine my loves of music, painting, poetry, dance, and drama. They are the best support I can offer of my proposal that all the arts issue from the same source as organs, extensions, and expressions of the same living body. Thank you very much.
Welcome to Peter and to our audience viewers. And thank you for joining in for this Q&A with Peter Sparling. I'm Joanna McNamara, and I also want to thank our technicians who are in on this Zoom meeting behind the scenes, Casey Sagan and Brendan Kirwick. Thank you. And Peter, thank you so much for this multifaceted, rich lecture demonstration. You are so prolific. Who would be creating a dance composition a day in this pandemic? And it's so inspirational hearing about your work. Particularly, I really enjoyed listening to and watching the evolution of your work as you moved from these large scale theatrical productions with film up to your solo work now, which, as you say, is a one-man show. You do your own dancing, performing, editing, and so on. And in thinking of what's going on right now in our world during the pandemic, it seems that a lot of artists are now doing solo screen dances because they want to express themselves. And so we're seeing this with company members from the Alvin Ailey Company, from New York City Ballet. We're seeing it on YouTube, Instagram, and so on. And I'm wondering, this brings up a lot of questions for us about funding, how we've always traditionally done things, how we, what our audiences have been in the past compared to now on screen dance. And, the whole idea of screen dance versus live dance on stage. And I'm wondering, if you have been, or what you're thinking about these changes in dance screen in our world and such, and what you're taking out of this right now. How you're seeing your future or our future in general in screen dance. Peter, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Lots of
lots of questions, right?
Can you hear me?
So, yes, I sure can. And, I think, my main question is, given the pandemic, and it's definitely changed the way we work as artists, as filmmakers, how are you seeing your role? How are you thinking about yourself as an artist in these times, and how you're going to move forward when the pandemic's over?
Oh my gosh, enough to write a book,
Yes, it is.
I think of this on many levels. At a personal level, I'd retired 2 years ago from the University of Michigan and was already a hermit in my home studio here. I began to rely upon myself almost as a Thoreau figure, where I tried to be resourceful and have everything I needed in this home studio, my green screen setup, my cameras, etc. So that I could really, in a sense, undergo a series of self-portraits on video. So I was already geared into being this one-man show that I've spoken of. Also, I will say this, that we know modern dancers have, from the beginning of the genre, had to be so resourceful. They assumed they had to do it all.
Mm-hmm.
The history of modern dance really begins with these revolutionary historical solo shows. Martha Graham's first solos, Doris Humphrey, Charles Weidman, Merce Cunningham when he left Graham's company in the mid-40s. We all kind of made our signature moments in the solo form as solo performer choreographers. Not all of us, but many of us did. And that
Sure.
was the kind of model to follow. So
Mhm.
I feel like I'm kind of coming full circle, where as I experience my body aging, I'm 69. Um, I I don't want the pressure of being told what I should or shouldn't be doing. I don't want the pressure of having to please another choreographer or a director. I really want to take the reins and do it myself. And it's indeed what I had to do when I first started my career in New York with my own company. This idea of dance on screen, though, I mean, my colleague Terry Saris and I have been teaching screen dance at University of Michigan. Well, we had until I retired for maybe about 20 years. And it became very evident to us that there was a global phenomenon that with technology, social media, and the extraordinary proliferation of media and cameras, dancers, choreographers, and directors were becoming fascinated with the human body on a screen. Of course, Hollywood, as I said, has been fascinated for decades. And it at first, I think certain presenters, choreographers balked at the idea of dance on screen as being diminished or flattened or not as much as something other and not enough compared to live dance. I always saw it as an opportunity to do things that I could never do on stage, thus learning editing and again, treating dance as one element of an interdisciplinary practice.
Right. And
So,
and being able to bring everything that you do into this newish medium, your painting and music, photographs, poetry.
and I will say that young choreographers or even middle-aged choreographers who are attempting work on video are learning very quickly, particularly during this pandemic, as you said, um, that it's not it's not as easy as just setting up a camera and dancing. There is a different set of criteria. There's a physics of moving for a camera to maximize effect, that kinesthetic effect.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's made dancers have to be much more self-sufficient and actually reevaluate the basis of the communication they are making as a dancer, as a body. One can hide within a company and be glorified on stage within masterworks of choreographic genius. But when you're home alone in your living room, having to communicate something essential to an audience over a flat screen or social media, you really have to dig deep and figure out what it is you want to say.
Mhm.
Also, audiences have short attention spans when it comes to flat screens. So you have to kind of pack a wallop.
Mhm.
I'm I'm thinking we're going to head back into the theaters once we find the vaccine and find some sanity in our universe again, hopefully. Uh,
Mhm.
that there's going to be such an ecstatic feeling of joy and relief of being back together again. We're just going to be freaking out with bliss. But I also think that what we're learning on social media and with dance on film is going to continue. I think there have been some huge leaps,
Right.
steps
Absolutely.
forward in terms of the relevance of communicating on screens.
Mhm. And it's so accessible to everyone. When you can sit in your living room and watch screen dance without going to a theater, let's say you have a kid at home or you can't afford a ticket, it's you can sit at home, you can watch a screen dance, and I agree with you. This kind of online streaming is probably going to become more and more popular, even though we'll get back to theater work. And as you say, there's nothing like face-to-face contact with dancers, just being able to see them on stage, physically there. to be able to see their sweat flying off of their bodies as they're dancing, and to be able to talk about it with friends, after a performance out in the lobby.
I think there's a two-way learning curve too, in terms of choreographers who in general work on stage suddenly having to work online or in video. There's a lot to learn from video. I'm working with a really wonderful choreographer in Northern Michigan, just kind of helping her think through her first video online Nutcracker. And it provides so many interesting options in terms of, how she films individual dancers, how she composes them and composites them, what she imports to be behind the dancers. Are they interior shots? Are they so it in a sense opens up possibilities in a very exciting way, and engages young dancers in new options for their futures.
Absolutely. Peter, it's so fascinating hearing your ideas and thoughts, and I would love to talk with you for a couple of hours. We've got to get together for coffee after this pandemic, but unfortunately we do have to move on. We don't have any questions from the audience, and our next screening is coming up at 5 o'clock. But this conversation, we need to do another conversation online for a couple of hours, and let me pick your brain like that. It would be great. So viewers, please join us. You can just stay on your computer, and this is going to automatically go to Screen Dance International Project Michigan. You'll be able to see Peter's full version of Scramble Theory 101, and he'll also be in the Q&A for this session. So we'll talk to him more about that and get more insights into his work with that, in our Q&A. And thank you again, Casey and Brendan. And is there anything else you want to add, Peter?
Oh, no, just thank you, Joanna, for allowing me to present the lecture and for showing the video, for doing all you do for the Detroit, Southeastern Michigan dance world. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your expertise, your inspiration, and your generosity in sharing your lecture demonstration.
Thank you, watchers. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, viewers, watchers.